Hey everybody, how's it going? Hope you're having a lovely day. So today I am going to be here with Tim Abbott of Zulip. Zulip is imagine Slack or Discord if it was open source and good. We have four major pillars to Fudoe software here. It should be open source. You should be able to manage your own instance. It should not abuse the user via marketing and advertising and all this other nonsense data mining. And above all, it should be good. It should be delightful to use. And it was very, very difficult for us to find something that would do this. And when we found Zulip, we were absolutely delighted with how well it worked. But what we found the most interesting with this piece of software is that they've actually come up with a sustainable revenue model for it after making a deal with a large tech company. So without further ado, I just wanted to bring on Tim Abbott. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Hey folks, happy to be here.
Can you talk a little bit about how you started Zulip?
Yeah, so the, the sort of origin story is way back in 2012. We just sold a startup, K-Splice, which was doing rebootless updates for the Linux kernel. So very sort of deep technology. Scaled that to 100,000 production servers all around the world that were using it to get rebootless updates. To Oracle, and it ended up being that the sort of our team wanted to go and build new stuff. So after we did a sort of transition of the technology to a bunch of people at Oracle, we hired a sort of distributed team there, which is sort of very different from the original setup of our team. We'd been all sort of MIT grads all in one room in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and in part just because it was sort of Linux kernel related work, trying to source people who were qualified for what we were doing, who were happy to work at a giant tech company like Oracle. We ended up having people all over the world. And that transition is like one of the best transitions I know from a sort of everybody in one room to a distributed team setup that I've heard about. And a big part of that is because we'd use this, sort of very old chat system that had been sort of around the MIT community called Zephyr. And it was like very janky, it was a curses application in a screen session. So like very much a terminal based sort of experience. But it had this threading model that is the threading model, not exactly that you see in Zulip today, but sort of that inspired the threading model that we use in Zulip today. And it just made it really easy for us to, just sort of set up our workflows around that. And so, we were sort of thinking about what we wanted to do next. We're like, well, we really want to use a chat system that has these properties. Like it really made it the case that we could do distributed work in an amazing way. Even for working in the same room, it was just so much more productive to be able to sort of work asynchronously so that you could do focus work. But like, I don't know, the Zephyr thing is like a pile of hacks, sort of it's like a curses application, a screen session. Like it only worked for K-Splice as a company because like even our salespeople needed to be technical enough to use a terminal-based client, like as and we're still fairly small, about 15 people when we were acquired. So just sort of thinking about it, there was nothing on the market that was anything like that, and so we decided that we'd sort of create this product ourselves and make it sort of a modern web application with mobile apps and that kind of experience. And that was sort of the origin for the original Zulip startup. We raised angel funding from a bunch of really high-profile angels, and we ended up about a year and a half in development. So in 2014, being acquired by Dropbox, and sort of Dropbox's vision is that they wanted to sort of have like a whole suite of chat of sort of apps, like a chat app sort of competing with Slack, and an email app, called Mailbox. They had a photo sharing app. They were sort of trying to be sort of all of the things on your mobile and web experience thing. And that strategy did not end up working out for for Dropbox. Ended up pivoting away from that plan. The sort of Zulip team ended up running a bunch of the main Dropbox app product. It was a sort of great experience as an engineer and as a sort of team. One of my co-founders was the head of product for the main Dropbox app. Another was the chief engineering manager. I was sort of the chief architect for that thing. But we were able to sort of get permission, at Dropbox to open source the Zulip product, which a lot of our like early beta users were still using, even though the sort of development had been paused as part of the sort of figuring out what Dropbox's strategy was. I can sort of go into the sort of full story of how that came to be, but we were able to get the product open sourced under an MIT license, or sorry, Apache license, with the entire 10,000 commits of Git history, and sort of able to sort of make it available so that it actually could be used both by that existing user base and by new users. And that's sort of like the sort of short origin story for how it ended up leaving Dropbox. I can go into more detail on any of those things you guys are curious about.
Yeah, the part that particularly most interested about is when you have something small project, a small open source project like Zulip that winds up being merged into a much larger company. You wind up seeing like certain features getting paywalled away or getting turned to subscription features, or that's when the data mining or advertising starts moving into it. So how are you able to keep Zulip what it was without it being ruined in any sort of way when having those initial conversations with Dropbox?
Yeah, so I should clarify a few details. So the original Zulip product was not open source. Like I as a co-founder wanted it to be, but my co-founders were less on board with that plan. So it was originally, we didn't know what our plan was. It was originally just a traditional SaaS service. But in part because Dropbox sort of didn't have interest in it as a product direction, and I think also in part because they as a person, sort of the leaders of the company did sort of care doing right by users when possible. When it wasn't sort of a big inconvenience to them, they were willing to open source it and just make it freely available to the world. But they weren't going to be maintaining it. So like there's a thing that happens pretty often where companies will do sort of a code dump of something, like they'll acquire a thing, decide that they're not interested in it, and sort of release its open source, but like they nobody maintains it. Like you look at the issue tracker and it's hundreds and hundreds of issue reports with like nobody even replies and so on. And like I just like hate that idea. It's almost like you did a disservice to people a lot of the time when you do that, because I don't know, like it's sort of like it's not actually useful to anybody, especially if there's no commit history, there's no documentation for how the thing works. Like it's just very hard for people to pick it up. Sometimes it works, but I feel like if you're going to do that, you need to explain that that's what you're doing, and often companies don't. They just do sort of a code drop and move on. So I sort of took it on upon myself. Like my main job was unrelated things at Dropbox, but I just sort of spent 5 or 10 hours a week, nights and weekends, maintaining the open source project, trying to figure out how to make an efficient contribution process so that I could sustain, sort of actually, helping improvements happen. And when I ended up leaving Dropbox, sort of, and was thinking about what I wanted to do sort of with the next phase of my career, I was really excited to do something that was open source and that was like, really sort of open source from all the way from a values perspective. Would be the type of company that I wanted to be a customer of, the type of open source project that I would be excited to contribute to. And, I was able to, Dropbox very, very kindly was willing to sort of donate the trademark for Zulip to that project. So we have no sort of formal legal relationship with Dropbox to date. It's just an independent open source project. So, I think that I will say that, like, I think most companies would not, would just say no, if you're like, we have a thing that we're not using, can we open source it? Like, I really do think that we sort of got very lucky in terms of the sort of leadership that Dropbox had at the time, that, they did have this mindset, like, yeah, if we can help people and it doesn't cause us any trouble, like, sure. And, it probably also helped that I was, a pretty senior, important person in the organization. And so was able to sort of get the conversation with leadership in the first place to sort of ask that, and then able to figure out like a plan for how to do the open sourcing. Like we, there's a lot of work involved in being able to release the commit history. Like we had a bunch of commits, had like the names of various customers, that you can't, sort of release as public information, confidentiality agreements and so on. In the commit messages, or like in the little like hard-coded, like, for this particular customer, like do this little hack, because, when you're an early stage startup in a private beta like that, that's a type of thing that you have a lot of. And so we actually were able to, during Dropbox Hack Week, fly out 10 users from various companies that were using Zulip and really cared about it in that sort of prototype form, and like had tried switching to Slack and been like, this is terrible. I prefer Zulip, even though it's unfinished. The mobile app stopped working. Like, just like this model really works for our work. And we were able to sort of do all the work to do like a polished open source release with documentation for how to set up a development environment, sort of a like tooling for setting up a self-hosted production environment, which is not at all easy if things only been a SaaS service, previously. And to also sort of cleanse that 10,000 commits of history. So all the customer names turned into customer 17.invalid, that kind of like thing. So, I'm very grateful to the sort of users who participated in that project, because it just wouldn't have been feasible, that like Dropbox was happy to say, sure, you can do it, but they weren't going to provide funding to do all of that work to make it sort of viable once it's sort of in the outside world.
Yeah, I mean, I find that aspect of this, very encouraging, that there are still good people at these big companies who will let the right thing happen, and it's rare. And those people who let that happen at Dropbox should be commended for, I dealt with really bad people at Yahoo with my company who basically just killed it, right? Without, with me begging them to let me keep it alive. So, the people at Dropbox should be commended for that.
Yeah, and I'll say it's like the kind of thing that like, you can't really write into your acquisition contract, like even if you care about that, like, once an acquisition is finished, like it's really hard to get the company that acquired you to actually follow through on their promises in any sort of concrete way, any sort of timeline. And so, I think it's, your best bet is to have an organization where their sort of like heart is, in the right place on this sort of thing, right? And more so than trying to compel it with legal stuff. And like even if you sort of manage to open source the thing before the acquisition is completed, like, I don't know, they can wield their non-compete agreement to prevent you from supporting the thing. Like, it's hard.
Yeah, I mean, they'll even sue you sometimes for patents and stuff. Like it's pretty ridiculous. So that's like, I'm really happy that you were able to arrange that. I'll just say, with the Futo organization, we went through, is there like a lot of drama. We were trying Mattermost at first. We kind of we knew what we wanted. We tried Mattermost, we tried Matrix, and they were both Matrix was really infuriating. Zulip we actually did Discord for a couple months, which just because, it worked at least. But yeah, Zulip has been great. Like thank you so much for a good product.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, it's worth talking a little bit about our vision for Zulip. Like, I think, there's, a common thing that a company will try to do where there's a popular SaaS product and they're going to make sort of like an open source version of that often maybe open core rather than open source, because often these are venture funded companies. And, in that case, often the ambition is to just sort of be like a sort of knockoff version of the thing that you can run locally. Like they're not trying to innovate, in terms of the sort of like try to, in terms of the product goal, like it's try to be sort of get feature parity and get the customers who would prefer to buy the SaaS product, but like for various organizational reasons, whether it's that they like open source or more often sort of in regulated industries where like they sort of don't want to have their data in a cloud service that is not under their control, whether it's sort of European companies for GDPR or in the US, if you think about it like healthcare, government, sort of computer security type spaces, there's education. There's a lot of industries that have a privacy regulations where it can just make their life a lot easier if they sort of self-host. But for Zulip, like we really care about the sort of being open source and self-hostable. But we sort of like go like as sort of far as possible in terms of that, like, as an open source project, and we really care about having a vibrant community. We invest a huge amount into sort of making it easy to become a new contributor in Zulip, easy to run a self-hosted fork, that kind of stuff. But also sort of, we really care about having like our goal as a product is to be the best way to communicate, not to be a Slack knockoff. And one piece of this is sort of the topic-based threading that I'm sure we'll sort of talk it more detail with Zulip. Is sort of our core model is designed to just make a good use of your time, especially as somebody who's consuming a lot of content in a chat application. But I'd also say that like one of our core philosophies is just like a real focus on attention to detail in interaction design. So there's a bunch of other features that are unique to Zulip that like are in some sense fairly simple ideas, but it takes a while to sort of come up with them and really pay attention to it. And I think sort of like careful crafting of that is a really important part of our I guess philosophy and goals as a project. And I think that shows when you compare Zulip to other sort of products that on the market. There's like more than 100 chat products in the market in general. It's a very crowded space. A lot of companies had the thought I would like to have a thing like Slack. It seems like a good business model with various forms of strategies. And I think that Zulip is not perfect. We have an endless list of ideas for how we can make it better, but I do think that everybody who uses it will generally tells us that they really appreciate the sort of attention to detail in the design and sort of being really thoughtful about how to make people's time be used more efficiently, let them have sort of more productive conversations.
Well, I mean, it's also just as an engineer, it's well crafted. I was running it on a Raspberry Pi, Raspbian on a browser, and it was actually okay. Like it was like probably 4 or 5 times faster than the competitors, and
Yeah,
that means a lot, just having like that instant snappy response in these apps.
yeah. We we put a lot of time into that sort of thing, and I think like that's one of these things which a little bit like I'm a big fan of the sort of goals of the Matrix project, and but I think they sort of have like a different angle for their strategy for how they're trying to come about things. Like for us, like our focus is really on trying to create like a world-class user experience that will make people really want to use the open source software. And a lot of that, like we constantly are rethinking details of the sort of precise protocol with sort of things like performance of both of sort of the loading screen, but also for like very as we sort of think about particular experiences that we want to add that might help you filter your messages or conversations in a way that is useful, trying to make those very, very fast. And it's very hard to like know in advance before you've gotten a bunch of experience of people using the product for years, like what exactly the set of things that you need in your sort of client sort of server protocol in order to make that work. And I think one of the things that we've seen with XMPP is that like they're sort of protocol ossified in a way that makes it hard to make the kind of world-class chat app that we have today. I just like remember having conversations with some of the like people on the board of it complaining about this.
So you're not using XMPP, I'm guessing.
We're not using XMPP, yeah. and like I very much want to do a federation thing, but like I want to make like a world-class experience and then figure out how to federate it, in some sense, rather than starting with a federation thing and end up with sort of a lot of things getting ossified. And
yeah, so one of the things I'd like to hear from you about how I feel like the open source community, I'm kind of new to it. I'm dipping my toes into it, learning more about it. They get really mad about things like that. They get really like, why aren't you using XMPP? Why aren't you using Matrix? Whereas in a traditional Silicon Valley situation, it would be healthy competition between the different projects, and may the best man win. Do you notice any kind of problems like that in the open source community, or is that just me?
I mean, like any community is really diverse, and I think like I really welcome all the sort of criticism and ideas that we get from being an open source project. Like I love that people will stop by chats@zulip.org and tell us like, look, like I like some of the things you're doing, but like this is just a bad decision, right? Like, and here's why. And I think the really thing which I really appreciate about the open source community is that a lot of people will give you like a lot of information as to why, and actually give you the opportunity to change what you're doing, sort of based on a reasoned argument.
Right. I mean, I love that too, but when it's like, why are you wasting your time on this other project when this project already exists? It's like that do you get that attitude at all, or
I mean,
not so much?
I definitely see it in online. I don't think I get it directly very much, but
Okay.
I don't know. Zulip has been on the Hacker News homepage, so like a dozen times, and there's always somebody who's sort of making the case for just using IRC or just using XMPP. And like I think that the it's complicated. Like, I think that there are a bunch of nice aspects of IRC. And I think for a lot of people, there's sort of this community feel of IRC that is meaningful to people. And I don't think that we should sort of ignore that. And we actually do have some features that are kind of a pain to maintain that are are things from IRC, like the /me messages is a thing that Zulip will display for you in a nice way. And people who like IRC, like that it does that. And it's not trivial to manage the rendering in a way where that is going to consistently work. But I think like, I think what they actually care, if you sort of think about, like, there's one thing that people really care about, which is that they can use like have some flexibility about what type of client they use. So like, one thing that's somewhat unusual about Zulip is that we've actually invested in a terminal-based client for it, and it's actually driven by community members, but rather than being something that like our company is doing all the work for. But there's there's a lot of work that even goes into supporting a decent sort of client like that. And for some people, like what they like about IRC is that you can consume it in a terminal. You don't have to use a web browser. That you don't have to have the potentially visually overwhelming experience for some people of big images and stuff like that you see in modern.
No, I mean, that's a great feature. Lots of really hardcore coders do not want to run X11 on Linux, so it's wonderful that you support that.
Yeah, but I'd also say that, like, I think in some sense what people are reaching for is like let's not like waste work making a bunch of duplicate versions of things, right? Like, and I think it's always a thing that we're thinking about is what stuff can we not duplicate, right? Like, and it's hard because there's often a trade-off between a thing that other people are using and in terms of, sort of being able to sort of avoid duplication of work versus, producing a product experience that's going to be compelling to users and make them actually, prefer. There's a reason that Slack has, most places that were using IRC don't have a strong preference for doing so. That often is sort of partly historical in nature. Moved to things like Slack or Discord, and I think a big part of it is there's just a bunch of modern features, and some of them are really basic things. Like IRC is not so great with even like a multi-line, message with a bulleted list in it, right? Like sort of like things that even in the area when IRC was made, like they could have added and made a thing that was sort of required to be an IRC client, but it's sort of like a single line based system.
Just even something like chat history, like on my phone, if I want to go into a legacy IRC channel that I've been in since I was 12 years old, that's the only place that I still use IRC for. I have to SSH into my home computer and then go screen-X so that I can scroll up and see history, because if I connect straight from my phone, I won't see history. Like IRC is cool, but there are a couple of things where some of the old timer just won't admit it's just a bit more of a pain in the ass to make that workflow work in a modern world where you're using your phone and multiple computers and stuff than it would be if you were just using something like Zulip.
Yeah, and I think you can solve individual problems like that, but one of the things that we've sort of learned about that sort of chat market is that it's sort of a thing you can sort of figure out from first principles. Like it's a group decision for an organization to all use a particular chat thing, right? Like if you have a group of 100 people and they're all going to use the same chat thing, like there's going to be features that are only important to like 2% of your user base, right? But like if it's actually really important to that person, then it actually, like it'd be a problem for this 100-person organization to all standardize on that product. And I think, like, I don't know, like we have like hundreds and hundreds of features in Zulip, and with various versions of what a feature is, right? And there's hundreds and hundreds more that we're sort of thinking about building. And it's a lot of it is sort of just that the long tail matters on these things. A lot of these features, you build the feature, it's invisible to anybody who doesn't care about it. But for the small number of people for whom it makes their life a lot better, like they really appreciate it. And I think in some sense, sort of protocols that were designed in the 80s or 90s, with a set of constraints that are sort of different from just like the constraints we have today in terms of how much CPU you can expect a computer to have, how much network, how fast networks are, et cetera. They can be hard to sort of, make a thing that's really nice today. Like one of the things we do with Zulip on the loading time point is that, like, really minimizing the number of round trips from when you type in your foo.zulipchat.com URL into your browser or whatever, hit enter. Like how many network round trips is it before it has all the data to display all the information, and how often, like when you're typing something, like suppose you're doing the type ahead to mention Lewis, does it have to go to the server and waste a round trip waiting before it shows you the options, or does it already have the information for them? And a lot of this stuff, like it's a lot of work to do it right. It creates a lot of complications. But if you're able to sort of do that well, like it just really feels like everything is snappy in a way that is sort of visceral for people, as opposed to a thing where they could really list the specific features that make it that way.
Yeah, it shows a real level of pride in your work, which is really cool, that they care about these very, very small details that make a larger difference to the user experience.
I'm guessing it also helps. I mean, you're not following you're following a model where you're the benevolent dictators. If you want to change the protocol, you change it and make it good. Or do you have a more involved process for changing the protocol?
Yeah, I mean, well, first, I think a thing worth mentioning is that we try to make basically all of our decisions by sort of like rough consensus. Like, we'll discuss things as a group, and like, I don't know, if 3 people say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea or whatever, and there are people who are reasonably informed about the topic, like, we'll start working towards implementing it. Now, if in part the fact that we're doing all of our work on Zulip makes it very easy for somebody who's maybe less involved in the project. They only stop by once a week. They show up, they see that conversation from 2 weeks ago, maybe even, and they add some thoughts that potentially suggest that the idea that we had is wrong. Like we can potentially change it, like and I think that decision-making process has worked very well for us. So I think of sort of my role as maybe sort of declaring when I think we've got enough consensus to proceed with something, but sort of all decisions in some sense are reversible, and we're a lot more aggressive about for things that are not reversible, sort of waiting for a lot more rounds of feedback and so on. In terms of sort of the API changes, like we have sort of a place within our Zulip community where we discuss every single API change, and that's important for like coordination with our mobile apps. Like the the mobile apps use the same API that we use for the web apps and also for the terminal apps and for everything else. It's the exact same API endpoints. It's just kind of a rare architecture. I think a lot of projects you end up with like a separate API for each app because it's sort of easier to project manage that. But what that means is that when we make a change, we have to think a lot about sort of backwards compatibility. Like we want it to be the case that if you're for whatever reason running a version of the mobile app from 2 months ago and you haven't updated, and the server updates with a new version, that works. And similarly, like if you're running a server that's like a year out of date with the mobile app, and we release a new version of the mobile app, that like just works. Like it feels like it's just a really bad experience if like suddenly the app starts breaking and you don't know why, right? And even if it's like the fault of the person who's running the self-hosted server that they haven't installed updates for forever, right? Like it, and obviously we also try to sort of surface that information because it can be a security hazard for them to not take updates. But again, it sort of like, do you want the outcome to be that the thing just silently breaks, or do you want it to do something reasonable? So if you like, we have an API changelog that has like 160 different concrete like feature levels of, we changed the API in this way. Here's the changes for that, and that is actually our primary way for communicating with like our mobile team about how the API works. Is just the API documentation. And I think that sort of discipline is really, really good for just having a experience that consistently feels smooth. But yeah, I mean, I think like our perspective is like our future user base is much bigger than the current user base, and like we should figure out how to make the app good rather than letting ourselves get sort of stuck into a spot that is all right, and a little bit, maybe hard to change, but like isn't the right way for the product to work. And there's just a lot of attention that goes into making it possible to keep doing those changes, and even at the level of just like renaming things where the name is a little confusing. Like for an internal API thing, like you can just have like the thing be called something different than what it's called in the product, but like over time that sort of produces a tax on future work on the project. We care about those taxes.
Cool. So let's talk a little bit about just at Futo we're trying to figure out how open source can kick the shit out of Google and Facebook and all these bad companies that are abusing people. Talk about the entrepreneurship aspects of what you're doing. Talk about how you're trying to charge customers. How do you convince somebody who can just get it for free that they should be paying? Like, do you have issues with customers who are more likely to just freeload just because they can, or do you find people are willing to pay? Like, we want to try to change the culture. We want to encourage entrepreneurship within open source. We want people running open source to feel like they can make a lot of money if they do something good. So how do you see that?
Yeah, so I maybe sort of the first thing to say is that like this is a thing that I care a lot about. Like actually one of my big motives for deciding to start a company around Zulip now that once it was open source, and was that I wanted to sort of provide a model for how you could have a successful like open source company that feels like an open source project, feels like as opposed to sort of a thing where it's like the source is available and you can submit a PR, but like I don't know, like that nobody's actually going to review it unless like you're a paying customer who like bugs them to do it, and like not like a small paying customer, like a really big paying customer where you could get a proprietary company to change their software for you anyway. And like I think like just having like a real community where it feels like people can stop by who have a good idea and get their change integrated in the product and sort of make a difference, because that's really sort of what motivates me. Is making the world a better place and sort of like contributing my work in a way that helps lots of other people. And like you can't really get that as an open source contributor if it feels like you can do a bunch of work and then they're just going to ignore it because only their employees are allowed to do things or whatever it is in the project. Like that doesn't really feel right to me. In terms of the business plan, I think it's worth emphasizing that there's like different types of open source projects, and they're very different in terms of what options you have for a business plan. Like some things, are like a library that's just used by tons of things, like OpenSSL. And for those, it can be very hard to have sort of a business model because you're sort of like you don't have like an end customer who's getting a lot of value from you. It's like everybody is getting some value from you, and it could just be sort of a little bit hard to do like figuring out how to make that work. And there are some ideas for trying to solve that type of problem that people have, like Tidelift, where they sort of get big companies to sort of like pay a pool, and then they'll look at your dependencies and sort of farm out the money to your pool or whatever, and maybe that can work. But one of the advantages that we have as an application is that we have sort of a direct relationship with the people who are using Zulip, and they're going to be, sort of like using our, documentation, our materials on a sort of pretty regular basis. And anyway, I want to make sure that one doesn't try to generalize sort of the things that I say to other types of projects that might be in a different.
Yeah, no, it's tough, but kind of where we see the most abuse happening is, look, Google and Facebook and Apple, they're all using a lot of open source software every day, like in all their stuff, but they do the last, the polishing for that direct relationship with the customer, and then they collect all the money. So we need more open source developers doing what you're doing, taking the core, Linux and everything that's free, and the encryption libraries, all that's free and open and being supported by big companies and being supported by everybody. But the last mile, we need more open source. We need the delightful clients. That's what I see as the biggest problem right now with open source is nobody really wants to polish things well for the end customer. But the end customers also have to want to pay for it once they get it. So I'm hoping you're getting lots of people paying you for Zulip when they switch from Slack instead of just freeloading.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of pieces of an answer there, but I think one thing to say is that it's actually just really darn hard to make a good product. Like, it just takes so much work, like especially for things with a mobile app. Like it's just a lot of work, and so I think I wouldn't say that there's not a bunch of people who want to make an open source application that's great. It's just in some sense there's sort of like a capital investment sort of situation, right? That like if you make a thing that's proprietary, you make it sort of like as close to proprietary as possible while having open source on the tin for sort of marketing purposes. Like you can attract a lot of venture capital, and that lets you hire a whole bunch of people and do things. And I don't want to overstate the power of that. Like like you can make world-class products with teams of 10 people and or fewer, and you see this all the time. I think like the Instagram and WhatsApp acquisitions of some of the more public things, and that was several years ago with even less in terms of sort of open source based tooling that can help accelerate whatever it is that you're doing.
I don't think there's any team more than 10 people that's actually doing anything really good at this kind of level. Like it is the small teams doing good stuff.
Yeah.
Even internally within, sure, WhatsApp might have 1,000 engineers now, but there's probably just a few that are really important.
Yeah, I'd also say that there's just diseconomies of scale. Like, the more people that you have in a project, the more sort of communication overhead, the more you sort of have to deal with sort of the like, promotions and management sort of processes potentially warping the needs of the product because you need to sort of advance people's careers and it's hard. In some sense, you can make better decisions if you can get all the information for a particular question into one person's head who's well informed and understands the priorities and so on. And the bigger the organization is, the harder it is to sort of do that. And one of the things that we think about a lot for Zulip is really trying to figure out how to like really keep our maintenance, or keeping the lights on maintenance costs low. Like we are really aggressive with support of like really thinking about how can we make the product better such that this person didn't need to ask us this question. Like that's central to our approach, I think, in terms of being able to scale a large user base with a small team. But to sort of circle back to the sort of like business model question, there's a few business models that you can have for an open source application. Like one is the sort of SaaS service model, right? Like sure, there's lots of organizations that have the capacity to install self-hosted software, like run it, maintain it, install security updates, back it up, all the things that they sort of need in order to really count on that as being part of their organizational infrastructure. And for something like team chat, like it's really important to your organization to have that work. You can lose a day of work if the thing's down. You can be very sad if it loses all your data. There's a lot of important internal information there that could be very problematic if it gets hacked. Like it's important. And so for organizations that don't want to do that investment, they can use we have a SaaS service available at zulip.com. It's very affordable pricing if you sort of compare the value that people get as a tool that every one of their employees is going to use for hundreds of hours every year. Like the price that we charge is negligible compared to that if you're paying your employees like it. And for organizations where not all of the people who are using it all the time are employees, like a bunch of if it's an open source project, we have for a lot of sort of worthy causes like that, we just sponsor it for free. And even for other things where it might be that you've got a community, we have sort of very generous discount plans to sort of make that work. But fundamentally, like if you're paying your employees, you can pay 4 times what we charge, for your chat application, and it'll be well worth it if it makes their lives better as a team. Now we also offer self-hosting Zulip, and I think that there's like a range of different ways that people do that. You guys can probably comment, but we try really hard to make it just work. Like it's really easy to install. We document how to set up all the things that you might want to set up in a in the type of fashion where whenever somebody posts being like, I can't figure out how to do this, like we actually go and think about how we can make that not happen the next time that somebody is trying to do that. That is a source of competition for our cloud service. That
right. I mean, but that's where I would say, we are self-managing our own Zulip servers. It wasn't hard for us to get done. We want to be self-managed because we really value sovereignty, but we also want to pay you. So, I would hope that people who are self-managing the software, don't think just because they're self-managing it, they shouldn't pay you. Like you're doing just as much work, maybe more work for those people.
Yeah, and I think it really varies with the organization exactly what ends up happening there. We offer support contracts with help for both installation and for if you have a problem while running it, and some organizations purchase that. I will say that like there's the organizations that do best with that business model are ones where their software is very hard to install and run, because like a lot of businesses they sort of they spend money to fix problems that they're having, and if you're running your Hadoop cluster and it's constantly having problems, like it's gonna be very motivating for the business to go and purchase a support contract for that.
Yeah, there are a lot of really, really, really basic things that QuickBooks has not solved for over 10 years, and I've gone over it in some of my older videos. And one of the things that's insane is, you can pay them to help you with these problems, but if they help you with the problems, then I probably won't want to pay you as much anymore.
Yeah. So I think that the support model, I think it like works well for a certain class of business. Like there's a certain sort of size of business for which they have somebody who's thinking about risk for the organization. And they'll be like, we could potentially save some money by not buying a support contract for this critical infrastructure for our business. But like, that's actually like, penny wise, pound foolish. Like, the sort of like risk attached to not having it be managed well is much more important than the money. But I think that there's sort of a size of like, I don't know, organizations that are more in the like 10 to 100 people range that might not be sort of what they're thinking about in terms of their strategy about how they spend their money. And, I think, there's definitely a bunch of such organizations that are running Zulip, are very happy, and are not paying for a support contract today. It's there's sort of different ways to sort of manage that situation as a business. I think like one thing that I think is worth emphasizing is that like in a market like chat that is just absolutely enormous, like every single organization that is trying to do serious work at scale needs communication tools. Maybe they just use email, but I think a lot of them are going to want some sort of thing that has a real-time capability, like a chat setup. And so it's not essential to capture every single dollar that could potentially be paid to us in order for us to be a successful business. So that there is a strategy for Zulip that is we sort of like we're going to make our money off the Zulip cloud service and off sort of the services type things for organizations that choose to buy it, but like we're not going to try and optimize fully on that. There's other organizations that go in a very different direction, like if you look at Mattermost or GitLab, like they have an open core model where they try to design it in a way such that you basically, like if you're a serious organization, they're going to have some features that aren't in the open source version that they'll refuse to merge into the open source version, right? That are sort of reserved for being the thing that gets you to buy something. I guess like I don't like that model. I don't think we're going to go in that direction.
I mean, do they? I mean, it's not officially open source, the core that they're trying to protect, but it's still. I mean, it's still like Python and stuff. So
yeah, I mean, I think like
you still get to see the source code.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that anybody who wants to cheat can cheat, but anybody who wants to cheat can cheat with proprietary software too. Right. Like you can there's a very long history of people pirating.
Yeah.
And and like especially in third world countries, right, like where they might just not have the money to buy the
Right.
thing because the company might not have a plan that is sort of priced in units that they can afford, but like you just pirate all of your software and so like you can't force people to pay, but I think like one of the things that we are always thinking about is how can we sort of provide a bundle of services that includes the type of great support that we want to provide for free. Honestly, we want to like fix problems with the product. We want to that's sort of in some sense more important to us than collecting money from support. And I think that trade-off, is obviously, makes the economics a little bit harder. But I think that there are things that one can do in terms of services for self-hosted customers that can provide them with a good story they can bring to their boss for like, yeah, we want to pay this. This is what our organization is getting out of it.
Have you ever considered just putting a superficial paywall in the self-managed server where it tells you, sorry, I'm going to stop running now because you haven't paid yet, but a programmer can go in and obviously disable that, but the programmer might just be reminded that, hey, maybe I should actually pay. The person managing the software would have that very hard kind of paywall moment where they're like contemplating, wow, I have been freeloading off these guys for a while.
Yeah, I don't think that that's the way that I would do it. Like I think that a lighter touch tends to work a lot better. Like people can get pretty mad if you just like break a thing that's been working happily for them with your sort of like thing of that form. But there's definitely like as an example, like currently for if you want to use Zulip with mobile apps on a self-hosted server, the sort of architecture, we it's a bunch of work to publish mobile apps. I don't know if you've everybody has worked with the iOS and Android stores, but it's like a ton of work, even given the source code, right, to actually get it published, deal with their extremely aggressive review processes, like deal with their constant changes in policies that they want you to accept these really long legal agreements and deal with their errors, right? Like we've had a number of times that the Zulip app was kicked out of the Apple App Store, or threatened to be, because they found that if you click on the privacy policy link on in our mobile app, that you could eventually find a pricing page on our website.
Yeah, well, that's just Apple being very evil. Like, yeah. we don't like Apple.
Yeah, and like they actually like basically forced us to make a special version of our privacy policy website that removes the header and footer from the website. So if you click those buttons from our mobile apps, you can't find that there's a pricing page, even though there's no way to purchase an individual license for Zulip. Like it isn't even like relevant to their sort of attempt to collect their monopoly rent on the App Store, because
yeah, I mean, that's so sad. I mean, the sad thing is if somebody starts building delightful apps, that charge, people money to use, but they're open source, the Apple is going to take 30% for doing like nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say like nothing, right? Like, anything that you do on the internet, right? There's a bunch of abuse that you need to manage, a bunch of, fraud, but I think, even with credit cards, it's like a 3%, is the rate for that. And that's honestly abusive already. Like it's like an order of magnitude, at least, too big for the amount of work that they're doing there.
Right. I wanted to, so one of the, just to get super nerdy here, Lewis mentioned the Futo pillars, and one of them is self-sovereign identity, right? Which is, you and I have been dealing with, SSH since the 90s, where our private key is our identity. Do you have any plans for Zulip to use, or maybe you already do, and I'm unaware, to use a private public key authentication mechanism instead of a password with a email recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that like we offer the email password thing. I'd say that we would usually recommend that people use some sort of single sign-on thing with some place where they've already bothered to do their identity, whether it's your Google or GitHub or something else, or for a lot of organizations like an LDAP or SAML or OpenID Connect, thing that is their own organization's authentication.
Okay. Like, so that would be sufficient, right? Like you could set up your own then.
And you set up your own Keycloak server or whatever it is, and yeah. And like those things are always a little bit harder to set up than you'd like, but we definitely have like an ambition to build sort of an OAuth model that lets you sort of like sort of just like manage the account where you have an account on one Zulip server, and you can sort of use that as your way to log into another Zulip server, so that just sort of like simplify the logistics of having different accounts and so on. If you want to use Zulip as your sort of authentication home. And so we'll probably build that at some point. But it's one of these things that like you want to sort of do right. Like a bad a bad OAuth thing that has security vulnerabilities or whatever is like worse than not having it at all. And I guess as an organization we tend to be very, very cautious about doing that, because ultimately like what we're trying to do is help our users. And so if we don't have the sort of intention to invest in making that good right now, we'd rather defer it for later.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things we want to one of the things we can maybe push forward more at Futo is some just guidelines and libraries and stuff that help that, because I think one of the bigger problems we have with Google and Apple is the identity trying to manage your identity everywhere. It's a big problem.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like it's sort of a hard problem. Like I think for Google in particular, like it's just so hard to do sort of spam filtering in a sane way, sort of yourself, and spam is such an abysmal problem.
Right.
And I think Google uses that to capture your email, and the email is often the sort of home of identity for a lot of products, because it's at least a thing that they can use to communicate with you, and reset your credential. Sort of a what else do you have that is a source of truth that somebody can demonstrate that they control, that they're not going to lose. Like 2FA devices are fantastic, but every 2FA system needs to have some plan for how you handle losing the thing, and not everybody is good at like printing out those codes and not putting them somewhere that you can find again. And it's a hard, like these things are hard problems. I don't think that there's anything wrong with having an organization that takes care of sort of hosting your identity for you. But I do think that the sort of monopolization of it, where there's just a few entities that can do it, and those entities are advertising giants. Like their motive is to sell the manipulation of other people to do things. Like that's sort of an unhealthy environment. Like I think it would be really cool if somebody were to build a sort of fully open source, fully sort of transparent, really like thoughtful pricing model, like just like all that they do is identity, for logging into other apps, and maybe some form of like email forwarding, so that you can sort of have it coupled in that way. But that doesn't have the rest of it's just a subscription business model. Like privacy is a central tenet for them. Like I think that'd be cool.
Let's see. I'm trying to think. Is there anything else we should cover?
May I? May I?
Yes, of course. Oh,
so the one thing I found interesting reading is that the feature that you were most excited about at Dropbox was topics. Can you bring up what was in mind with topics?
Yeah. So I think like one way, sort of at a high level, like you can talk about this a bunch of different ways, but like if you use a chat product like Slack or Discord, and you have a conversation in a channel, and that conversation is like a real conversation, like it gets to like 100 messages a day of conversation. Like it's not just like you're sending like a quick 5 messages a day as how you chat. Like anything you get sort of a channel working at scale. The sort of like threading model, or the sort of model of basically almost every chat app that you can use today, it's very inefficient of your time. Like if you're reading it and somebody replies to something, it's just all the messages are sorted by time, within that group of people. And so like you're constantly sort of like looking to see whether somebody replied to your thing, potentially like after some other unrelated conversation happened. You're sort of, when you ask a question, you're always like wondering whether you need to wait until the current conversation is done so that people actually see it and reply. Like there's like all these like taxes on your time and attention. And also if somebody says something and you want to reply to it, but you don't have time right now, like it's actually like a concern that it'll get lost in the scroll back or whatever it is. And this creates like a bunch of other bad habits that are sort of cascading consequences of that. Like, and you like sort of constantly mentioning people, which really makes it hard for them to do focus work, just because you want to make sure that they see something, and you don't need it to be right now. You just want to make sure that it's ever. And so Zulip solves this problem with organizing conversations into threads, and in particular, they're sort of labeled threads. The labels are called topics. And critically, in contrast with almost every chat product that you'll see today, like every message is in a topic. So it's sort of the same threading model as email. Like it's very simple, right? Like you have, like your mailing list is like the set of people, or the, that you want to send this email to, right? Or whatever, right? And then the subject line is like what you're talking about, and people can reply, right? Like it's the same sort of like data model, but but in a chat context, so you can sort of have much more real-time conversations, and with all the sort of integration that you get from a real-time thing, like you link directly to a single message within a conversation, and people can just click that link and see what you're referring to. Because it's sort of a sort of a contained system, I guess, we're able to let you move topics, to a different, either rename them or split the messages into two different topics when there's a digression, which inevitably happens when people are talking about anything, but still sort of cross-linking the two things in a way that feels nice. And even, move topics between streams, which are, sort of our version of channels. When you sort of discover you're sort of talking about a thing, but it's with the wrong audience, and you want to sort of bring in the right audience for having that discussion. And the sort of like, it takes a little bit of getting used to just how to organize your conversations, but I think almost every organization figures that out within like a week of using the thing. But once you're sort of using Zulip well, like the experience of somebody reading is just fantastic. Like you come back to your computer after being gone overnight. Maybe people are in different time zones and it's been working. Like you can just hit the N keyboard shortcut to jump to the next unread topic. You read the conversation in context. You can respond with your thoughts. People are going to be able to see those thoughts in context with the previous part of the discussion. You can follow up on a thing from 2 months ago, and the context is all right there, and it's sort of easy to sort of discuss what's happening there. And then you can link to those topics like in your issue tracker or some other external reference, or like in a support thread with a customer in email or whatever it is. And like again, like the context is all there, and you sort of save all of this time that you would be spending like trying to just figure out what was the conversation that was being had about this thing in something like Slack, and you save all the and also like you can go like as the leader of an organization that is using Zulip, like can go and focus on something for 2 hours, not look at my chat at all, come back to it and batch process 20 different conversations with my thoughts on them. And it's incredibly freeing in terms of my ability to do the type of focused work that you need to make good decisions or to sort of do anything hard. And I think like the sort of core sort of principle is really thinking about like where you spend your time in communication. And a huge part of it is reading and understanding what other people are saying. And so we really think that the message that you send is going to be read by 10 people. And so we should really, on average, maybe it's going to be 50, maybe it's going to be 3, depending on the message. But like we should really provide you the tools that you need to sort of organize those conversations in a way that people can make decisions, and provide all the sort of additional stuff on top of that. Like we have the ability to mark a topic as resolved, and it's just like a lightweight way it displays it with a check mark, and it provides a very easy way if you're sort of managing some process in a channel. Like we use it for our hiring conversations, or we use it for certain types of bug reports or things that we're discussing that we need to do for customers, and you can just see like what is the stuff we haven't done, like and go and just review those, sort of very very efficiently, follow up on things that need follow up. It also really helps search, because like you just need to remember that some set of words that happened in a conversation, and you can search for it and then find the topic and then get exactly the stuff that was that conversation, and not like the sort of long unrelated conversation that happened to be with the same channel, same set of people. So that's like the high level of it.
It makes a lot more sense when I think about it. I just kept fat fingering the topic, and I would type my message in a topic and then start hitting send and going, why is my message not sending? Because I was used to that area.
So if you want, we can talk about our experience with so we sure. Let's see. The topics to us has been controversial, I would say. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you get a lot of feedback on it, but there's some people in our org who are still very unhappy with the topics. I agree with everything you just said. It makes context switching like very easy. I think it's just a few things that would make it a little bit better for the naysayers, which is just like, like if you tap in the app, I think if you tap new message, and then in the message field, it'll jump you to the topic field automatically if you haven't set the topic. Mm-hmm. Which causes people to type messages into the topic field, and then they have to cut and paste it out of the. I think that's just like an easy fix. Like I don't think it's it's not a fundamental problem. The topics are actually really good.
Yeah, like I was actually scrolling as you were explaining everything. I was scrolling through our own Zulip just to see how topics were getting used, and I thought like you are correct. If if you have like, you know, let's say a team of like 20 employees or so, having different topics within one channel or one stream is kind of cool. But it's just I was offsetting the usefulness of that by my prejudice and aggravation from like
no,
I would hit.
I mean, I'll just say this. I think it's good what you're doing. I think like this is just my opinion too. So tell me to shut the fuck up too. I really think it's good that you're doing this with the topics, and I think you should hold your ground if anybody is telling you to get rid of topics or anything. I don't know if anybody is even telling you that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that sort of, you know, these things tend to be like, you know, issues with either the sort of onboarding experience and or sort of little bits of the interaction design. So for example, the mobile thing that you described, like there's different types of views that you can look at in Zulip, right? There's one type of view like that, you know, sort of like the way that we expect people to use the mobile app, right? Is you load the app, it shows, you know, no messages at all, right? It shows the set of, you know, sort of streams and topics where you have unread messages, sort of this inbox view. And, you know, you click on a topic and you land there and you can read the things there. You can sort of mark them as read or not, depending on whether you sort of want to come back to it at your computer or whether you've sort of processed it to the extent that you need to. And then, you know, you go back to the inbox view and repeat. And we also do have these interleave views where you can see all of the messages in a given stream. And those are useful for sort of more specialized set of use cases. But, you know, sort of, you know, if you're in one of these topic views and you hit reply, the topic box is already autofilled. It knows where you are. It knows what you're replying to. And the sort of like, you know, but if you're in the sort of interleave stream view that shows all of the, you know, has all of the messages in that stream sorted by time, like that's a view that we don't expect people to use a lot, you know, and I think, you know, there's a little bit of a design problem in the mobile app currently where it's sort of too easy to get into those views without realizing that that's what you're doing. But then if you're in such a view and you try to like start a new message, like it's actually ambiguous where you want it sent. Like we don't actually know which of these places you want to do.
Yeah. So my opinion would be, yeah, like I am steel manning topics as much as I can in our org. And that's just like I kind of just have to admit, like the only issue, I think you would get rid of 80% of the frustration if there was just something special that instead of automatically going to the topic when somebody tries to compose a message that doesn't have a topic, to do something more jarring for the user to realize that they've been moved to the topic. Maybe that could make, I don't know. I haven't really thought through exactly what the solution would be. And I apologize if I'm like trying to design.
No, it's fine. I mean, you know, we have, you know, in our issue tracker, I think, you know, both things, like one is that, you know, probably like if you're in one of these interleave views and you're in the mobile app, you know, and, you know, because it just, there's a little bit less space to do the way that we solve this problem in the web app. You know, that topic thing, you know, can have like a little drop down with here's like the options that are recent topics in this thing, you know, and sort of just help you like click one to pick, right? You know, but also, you know, like I think actually the crux of the issue is that we shouldn't be bringing you to that view as easily as you are, and like that should be a thing that you discover after you've been using the product for a while and you sort of know what's up and so on. And you know, but we don't need to go too into the details of this particular you know thing, but I think, you know, one of the things that's always really tricky with product design is, you know, you constantly get feedback from people, and you have to really have like a model of how you expect the product to be used to sort of figure out like what are the, like there's often more than one place where something needs to be changed in the app in order to sort of like avoid the sort of unpleasant experience that somebody has, you know, which often happens in like onboarding is always that sort of hardest part because they don't know all the other things about how the app works, and they'll sort of can potentially end up not discovering something that's really you know, sort of important to having a nice experience. And you know, there's sort of like, you know, basic things like, you know, if you're in one of these interleave views, you know, you can click on any message to reply to the topic that message is in. And you know, if you sort of, you know, don't read our little tutorial and don't discover that, then like you might be like, how do I send a message or whatever, right? Or how do I reply to something?
Well, just, you know, I mean, the sad truth is, you know, as much as you are distinguishing yourself with, you know, a very unique product, people are looking at it as like, well, I mean, people are going to be on all these other things too. They're all going to be on Slack. They're all going to be on Discord, and they're going to compare, and even Signal and WhatsApp and Telegram. So they're going to be comparing all these experiences with each other. And so it's going to, you know, there's going to be the people who are just frustrated and they're going to tell you the wrong thing, and you need to ignore those people.
Well,
but there is like maybe a few things that, yeah.
I don't think ignore is the right word. Like, I think, any feedback that you get about people having a bad experience, you can really reflect on like, what are the things that you can change about that. And, sometimes it's just hard. Like, even for products that people sort of think of as simple and easy, like, Discord and Slack, like largely that's sort of a marketing thing. Like I've encountered a number of people who are like, yeah, I couldn't figure out how to use Slack properly. Like, I tried, a bunch and it just, and it's some like, sort of like detail about the, they didn't figure out that for some workflow that's really important to how they, work. Like they just didn't figure out that there's a button that does it that actually there is or whatever, right? And like it's a hard problem with any product to do this. And it does create this sort of market advantage for a thing that is popular, that there's more people who have already been forced to through some some sort of previous thing figure out how to use it. But
The
like I
topic
think
is
it's actually
definitely better than, but by far in Slack when you're like replying to one individual person and you can't see it without clicking in another view. Like it's definitely better than Slack's implementation of that,
yeah,
in my
like
opinion.
right. Like I think it's inarguably sort of better in the sort of like steady state once an organization has figured it out. And one of the things that we're constantly investing in is sort of different ideas for how to do the sort of onboarding experience to increase the fraction of people who figure out how to use it like quickly, or how to really get the most out of topics quickly, because that's a lot of what determines sort of what happens when people are evaluating a product. Like it might be that the product is better for them if they stick with it for 2 weeks, but we need to sort of you're sort of always with any product like trying to figure out a better way to get them to sort of understand how it's going to help them, especially with something like a chat thing that's a joint decision for the whole organization. You sort of need to get everybody to sort of see how it's going to help them work more effectively, not just a small number of people who might have more time to learn about it.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. We're almost at an hour. We would be humbled and honored to have you at our event next week on Friday. We're gonna have a like fair roster of high tier programmers like yourself there, just for some food, music, talks, and everything else. If you're in the Austin area.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll see if I can make it, I guess.
All right. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.